Hey, good afternoon or evening if you're watching this live and you're somewhere on the west side of the US, or actually in the US in the evening. And if you're someplace else, welcome for wherever you happen to be. And if you're watching this later, welcome from some time ago and how's the future? So, for those of you who might be new, I'm Andrew Hill. I own a company called Peak Brain that helps support people in doing neurofeedback. And we also do a lot of education around brain focused health topics and interventions. We do some mindfulness groups. The whole point of Peak Brain is to help people learn to take control of their brains by becoming an expert in their own brain activity and how that might translate to resources. And these live streams every Monday are set up to really do a deep dive into a particular topic. And often, you can go look at my show notes for other live streams. Often we dive deep into a particular topic and I write a little article on that topic and also talk about some of the neurofeedback approaches for it and then demo a neurofeedback session at the beginning usually. So I'll definitely start with some neurofeedback. But I was going to today talk about some of the ways to optimize neurofeedback or what might get in the way, because I was seeing some people ask on different forums about medication interactions and how to manage medications, and I get asked quite a lot from people wondering what they have to do when they start neurofeedback or when they do brain mapping with regards to meds, and if they should do other things in their life when they're doing neurofeedback to get the most out of it. So I thought I would, oops, turn that off. I thought I would cover that topic a little bit tonight. And, often I do a more research-backed based kind of list of different things you can dig deeper into. Tonight, it's really just me talking about what I've experienced over about 25 years of doing neurofeedback in terms of ways you can optimize and what really matters. So let me start off per typical. Let me know if my audio is okay. I tend to have recurrent problems with the audio quality, not showing up loud enough or clear enough. Hey, Radar Ashwood, welcome. Thanks for saying hello. I'm going to set myself up with a neurofeedback session, I think, to begin per usual, and then talk about some of the things we can do to optimize neurofeedback. So let's look at the Eager software, and I'm going to go into my own client ID and plan that. So you can see how it's behind my head here. Let me move myself over. There we go. So it's not super visible on this giant screen, but here's the head plot. And I'm going to do something, let's see, clear this. And I'm going to do a C4 minus A1 protocol. So just tap on the head or just type it in, C4 minus A1. I'll explain what that is in a second. And we're going to do a slow inhibit or a low frequency inhibit of 4 to 7, which is a theta. It's a fairly classic protocol. And for a reward, I'm going to do 11.5 to 14.5, I think. Well, I think I'll do 12 to 15, actually. So there's my inhibit. Here's my reward, 12 and 15. Then we'll do 22 to 34 for the high inhibit, high frequency inhibit. So what I'm doing is setting up 3 different frequency bands. You may be able to see here on the screen below the head plot, there's 3 overlapping filters or lines. And what those are showing is the band filtering and how you're picking up the different frequencies. And that can be useful. If you glance at that, you may notice that the boxes are not square. When you measure like 12 to 15, you're getting some 11.5 and some 15.5 as the filter rolls off. And this is a trade-off you make when doing live signal processing, is you get pretty close to a measurement, but if you do too many passes through the filtering to get a perfect measurement, then you end up slowing down the time resolution of signal processing so much you can't do real-time brain training. So we use filters that are good, but not perfectly square shoulders. Let's see, C4 minus A1. We're going to do this for, let's do 21 minutes. One of the things that is true about neurofeedback in terms of optimizing it is getting the right session counts in, getting enough time in, and doing enough regularity with the sessions to really let them build up. I mean, this is essentially personal training, and going to the gym a few times a week is how you make progress. Going once every so often, not so much. All right, let me save this. Hey, Sonia. Hi, Dr. Hill. Evening. Sound is not loud enough. Okay, can I turn it up a little bit? I just turned it up all the way, Sonia. It's as loud as I can make it. So I hope it's doable. I'm taking my headset off and setting myself up for some neurofeedback now. I'll try to stay up on the mic, which might help the audio quality if I'm really close to the microphone. And hello, everyone. I see a bunch of folks watching. Welcome. So again, the start of these talks is to have a little bit of neurofeedback. So I have some silver wires here that I'm going to set up. And I'm going to use what's called a Q-Wiz amp, an old style amplifier. And let me put some ear clips on. Hey, Fred. See some folks showing up. Welcome to the live stream. Thanks for showing up live. I really appreciate it. I mean, I'd still talk even if you weren't here, but it's nice to answer questions and say hello. So I have a big giant tangle of wires here in front of me. Hey, here's a pro tip for those of you who train with lots of wires that can get really tangled. If you've ever seen those cord keepers that you might use to prevent like a mouse cord from falling off a table or a desk, you can get those cord keeper little rubber buttons and stick them to a wall and then hang the wires, hang the electrodes on the wall when you're not using them on your head. And they work pretty well. You'll find in some of our offices we have that solution, and other offices we have really fancy electrode hanging racks that we've built. So I'm just getting the extra wires out of my way. So I'm guessing some of you guys do neurofeedback. I'm curious if you've trained today or if you have any questions about neurofeedback in general. Please lay them on me now or whenever you like. And sit here square to my little picture frame. There we go. All right, so I have 3 wires that I separated out of my tangled bundle. Those are a couple of silver ear clips and a silver flat wire that will go on top of my head. And I'm going to use some, it's called 1020 paste. This little stuff here. And this is just an electrolyte, sort of paraben-based paste. It's fairly innocuous, but I haven't found anything that's not a synthetic paraben or a wax like this for this purpose. So, all right, so this is going to go on one of my ears here, my left ear. The ears are pretty easy to find. Radar, I was going to train later this week. Want to try the Sebring-Fisher protocols to see what happens. Those can be a little intense, Radar Ashwood. You might not want to do Sebring-Fisher style training just to see what happens unless you either have lots of experience pushing your brain around or don't mind being thrown off. Doing attachment trauma protocols will feel kind of icky right when you're done. In neurofeedback, most protocols feel gently positive, a little calm, a little focused, a little relaxed, or kind of nothing. And then over the next few hours, a little subtle thing will emerge. That's most of them. And you can kind of gauge if you're getting the right effect based on, did you get some subjective effects that were positive? But trauma, especially attachment trauma type protocols, they tend to create a release, kind of speed running or reorganizing some of your relational stuff. And it can be a little bit disconcerting. And that protocol class sort of feels a little bit weird and crunchy and irritated right afterwards. And then later on, things can feel better. So I'm plugging my amp in now. Radar is quite experienced, yeah. Fred, you doing some alpha theta? We love alpha theta. Yeah, Radar, you should. I'm not suggesting you're not experienced with neurofeedback. I'm suggesting that those protocols can be a little bit hard to predict. So you may want to, go slowly. Also, Sebring would generally suggest doing about 3 or 6 minutes initially of that style protocol, FYI. Sorry, this is my left ear clip. That will go into the reference. My right ear clip will go into the ground. And then I'll put a wire in my head. There we go. Radar says, generally, if a protocol feels bad, then it's probably bad for you. Yeah, I would agree, but these attachment trauma protocols are not like that. When I was developing a version, if you will, of the Sieber and Fisher style protocol set, I read a paper that Sieber commented on, and then talked to her a little bit about some of her protocols, and went and created a version of attachment protocol that I think are, a little bit, well, my style, if you will. And at the time, I was supervising a lot of psychologists working with their clients. And so I didn't feel super comfortable digging around with brand new powerful protocols that were designed to release trauma, but my psychologist mentees did. And I gave 2 or 3 of them this protocol and said, this may be effective, at least theoretically, and it seems to fit some use cases and some clients. So I had 3 different clinicians try this protocol, and it's what I call a double down, alpha double down. And all of them reported something similar, which was the clients either finished the protocol, or later on that day, there was a voicemail or an email. And essentially the client's reaction was, without fail, I didn't like that. Don't do that again. I'm annoyed. I'm frustrated. I don't like how that felt. I don't want any more of that. And then every single one of those clients, within a day or 2, came back and said, hey, can I have some more of that protocol? Can I try that again? And what I found is that particular set of protocols releasing that deep attachment trauma toward the back of the head, it feels like you're speed running your crap. And it doesn't feel good generally. But then later on, there's an organization. So you do feel better later, but initially can feel really disconcerting, kind of crunchy, irritated, angry. So watch out for those Sieber protocols. They're not exactly like other ones, I think, because they touch developmental, early life stuff. All right, my third wire is in my head. Let me plug that in. Hey, Madeline. Madeline's joined us. Radar's asking, would I say Siebern's protocols do the best at calming the brain and reducing stimulation? Not at all. No, not at all. Siebern's protocols are not soothing protocols. They can be calming, but generally no. Generally, you don't want to work that deep in the brain and expect you're going to get calming. It's really working on releasing things more than calming things. So I think over time you can get a change in how, go look at the one paper on Siebern's website where she talks about the theory behind this style protocol. And there was a research paper she was commenting on where it was a small number, maybe 15 people who had, or 16, who had dissociative PTSD with developmental trauma, went into an MRI, an fMRI, looked at coupling, brain region coupling of, blood flow coupling in different regions. And one single protocol training above the posterior cingulate, but really getting access to the periaqueductal gray and deeper tissues, changed the coupling between the PAG and the amygdala in 85% of those people with one session. And so that kind of effect was what I was looking for when I created this version of the protocol. And it does something like that, but neither that version nor the version I use would be calming as it lands. So I would say it's trying to get after a deep thing, a subcortical to some extent phenomena. And this might be why it acts differently than some of the other protocols. Hey, Bonnie, good to be able to hop back. Yeah, welcome back. Life does get in the way. Life is what happens when you're busy making plans, right? All right, so I have wires on. My amp is somewhat stable. Let me start my session and explain what's happening to anyone who is new to neurofeedback. So I'm going to go up and hit the run button here. I'm going to move my head over, I think, as well. There we go. I'm off to one side. Run that. And we're going to pick a game. Let's go with formation, old school game still. Okay, so now we have a raw trace squiggling across the top of the screen. This is initializing. The amplifier and the software waking up. The buffers are going. There we go. So now I have brainwaves. And you can tell they're live brainwaves because when I move, we get noise in the signal. If I clench my jaw, we get high frequency noise, high amplitude noise as well in the signal. So there's some live data. And I'm pulling that off my head, off these 3 wires, the right-hand side minus my left ear. So it's kind of a non-specific right-sided measurement because the left ear being subtracted from it is also picking up some of the left hemisphere. So it's kind of a super high-level right hemisphere training above an area called the precentral gyrus on the right. We call it C4 in neurofeedback or EEG coordinate parlance. But it's the right precentral gyrus, which is the most posterior part of the frontal lobe. And it's an SMR training protocol, which I use a lot of. And SMR really is central to the success of doing neurofeedback. You would often either start with SMR or finish with SMR in a classic neurofeedback context. And so this is an SMR protocol. And I'm measuring, you can see here, 3 other bands. We have 4 to 7 hertz, which is theta. And that's getting 20 microvolts of theta right now. And generally, you want theta to go down. So I'm going to reset my thresholds here. Oh, that's the wrong button. There we go. So now you can see my average theta is 18 microvolts, 18.5 or 6 or 7, 19 microvolts. And my threshold now says 26. So the lines that are outside the band are showing us how big the band is, how much theta I have moment to moment. So when I have a surge of theta, these big squiggles happen, and a red line gets drawn across the theta because my theta amplitude surged past the threshold. And then down here we have a reward band, so that's 12 to 15 hertz, SMR itself. I'm making 10 microvolts, and I set my threshold at 7.75. And in this case, I'm mostly above my threshold, outside those lines, and that's why I'm getting a green line painted through the waveform. And we have another inhibit band here for high frequency beta. So I'm going to kick this off. My signals are a little noisy because I'm moving so much. One way to fix that noise is I could stop talking, but that wouldn't be as fun. I mean, maybe it would, but not as much fun for those of you who are listening. One trick in Eager is if you scale up the size, rather scale down the size of the raw trace, it provides a little more of an aggressive filtering on the raw signal. So right now we're at scale of 20 microvolts, and if I go to a scale of 50, so F9, selected my scale box, hit plus, scale to 50, makes my waveform smaller, but it also applies a little bit more filtering. So the waveform is going to remain more stable just by scaling up. And then it means it'll be a little bit less sensitive to my movements from talking. It should still be sensitive, yeah, there we go, to a gross movement. So just by changing scaling, I was able to get away with talking, essentially. All right, let me hit F5 to begin. Where's F5? Right there. Whoops. Oh, not Control F5, Function F5. There we go. All right, that's a bit loud. Let me turn that down. So I am training, as you can see, turn that volume a little bit. As you can see, I have a little bit of a picture game there on the bottom right of the screen. And when all 3 of my brain waves are trending or staying in the right direction, that's going to let the game show me more of the picture, let a picture square show up, and there's a vertical green line showing up on the top of the screen as well for every half a second that my brain spends in range. And it's mostly an involuntary process, so I'm going to sit here and answer questions and talk to you guys while I train my brain. So let's see here. Fred is saying, lesson learned today, alpha theta training before running. Alpha theta before running. Fred, I could think that that could be either a really interesting, awesome experience or a really annoying experience, because for some people, alpha theta makes them feel kind of stoned, and it might be hard to muster the athleticism required to run. But some of my runner friends, like John, they get like a runner's zone, like a flow state just from running. And I would wonder if you got more access to that flow, that being in the zone when running. What was your experience doing alpha theta first and then going for a run? Hey, El Chatarino. That's a fun one, the feedback. Are you looking at my my formation game, just basic game? Yeah. We create versions of this game for our clients that have picture galleries that they're interested in, especially for kids who might need a particular thing to watch to like pay any attention at all to the process happening. The picture game here is nice. It's nice and flexible. I still, I've promised, but I'll still do a one of these at some point soon where I run through all of the games. Yeah, the puzzle called Formation, El Chatterino. It's one of the basic built-in games. Pretty good. It's, a lot of adults come back to this game after trying even the fancy, flashy Zukor games. Yeah, you can do a photo roll with it, exactly. You would load in a bunch of photos. It's a little finicky in terms of the aspect ratio and the resolution that it accepts. So I generally give it like between 20 and 50 pictures and find that it accepts about 2/3 or half of them. And then we end up with a topical pixel gallery. So we have galleries we pre-install for clients, things like Cars of Cuba. We have kitten galleries. We have puppy galleries. We have a Burning Man gallery. There's a few other galleries in the Formation setup that you can do. It's nice because it's a built-in game, doesn't cost anything extra, and it ends up being one of the very functional games that people generally enjoy. You can see that I'm using a random display right now, but you could also set it up to go across and unveil the pictures in order. You could also set it up to seed the order, where it starts off anywhere on the screen and then works its way out from there, kind of like an old school snake game. So yeah, Formation is pretty basic, but I think the basic games work just fine. And many of the adults we work with go back to the basics after trying all the fancy games, because it's just kind of enjoyable actually to sit and watch your brain, chip away at stimuli instead of having lots of busy things happen. All right, so the topic tonight is how to get the most out of neurofeedback. And I wanted to cover a few different broad things. One is about the training process itself. What can you do to maximize it? What considerations should you have in it? Before you even get there, though, there's considerations around medication and supplements and how you might need to time those things or adjust those things based on both the process of neurofeedback as well as the actual assessment called a brain map. So when brain mapping, when doing a QEEG, you're going to do a full head of electrodes, a full cap, or individually placed electrodes. Madison, remind us, need to get you a full head system as well at some point. Those amplifiers you have, the CGX you have, we can get a breakout board if you have anyone who has like thick braids or dreadlocks for placing individual wires. So we should make sure you practice on that as well, as an aside. But when doing a brain map, we set up 19 channels in the head plus ears at a minimum, and then have people sit still for about 10 minutes eyes closed and 10 minutes eyes open. And if they have any neurological stuff like seizures or anything else, we try to record long and get a 20-minute recording. That's sort of the threshold for what a neurologist wants to see is 20 minutes total data. So we gather this resting baselines, and the point of QEEG is to compare you to a population average at your age, not to be concerned about not being average. People are weird, good job. But to use the ways in which things stick out to learn more about yourself, see where you have unusual features, think about which brainwaves they are, think about if it seems plausible, meaningful, and then you can take some control over it. So we have this resting baseline process that we do at the beginning and then every couple of months when doing neurofeedback. And QEEG does not change rapidly. It changes very, very slowly. It's very much a measurement of traits, not states. And so we like to get a QEEG. We also get an attention test alongside it to get some behavioral stuff that's pretty easy to interpret. And we look at how those things are operating. Now, when doing a QEEG, it is important, really important, to manage what's in your system, because you're being compared to a database of people who don't have caffeine in their system or other stimulants, and stimulants make a huge impact on the EEG. So we ask folks to abstain from all forms of caffeine from 4 o'clock in the afternoon the day before, including chocolate, orange soda, your tiramisu dessert, your green tea, everything ideally from 4 o'clock. And then by that next morning, caffeine's mostly out of your system in terms of EEG, and we can get a reasonably clean recording. Now, if you're taking psychostimulants, things like Adderall, Ritalin, etc., those actually take about 48 hours to wash out. And it is important that you do that if you're going to do brain mapping for the purpose of understanding your brain. Getting that QEEG without stimulants in your system is somewhat critical to reveal the things you want to work on. Now, you can also do a combination. You can do with and without stimulants and learn in real time actually what stimulants do for you without having to guess. How much is it impacting a performance test for executive function? And what is it doing to the resting brain waves, the big patterns that might support executive function? So the first thing to make neurofeedback effective and not get in the way of neurofeedback is do your brain mapping properly. Do it in the first half of the day, not super tired, uncaffeinated, with an appropriate washout for stimulants, 48 hours. People also need to do about 24 hours for cannabis if they're regular smokers, and 48 hours for cannabis if they're regular edible users, because it's a longer lasting impact. But generally beyond that, you don't need to modify medications. You want to get your MAPs in the morning before your meds and before your supplements. But generally, most medications that act on a blood level, like SSRIs and other long-acting medication, they don't acutely distort the EEG. They do shift it. You can see a change, but they don't hide the patterns. And so you don't have to have somebody, you shouldn't have somebody wash out a bunch of meds when doing a brain map. Just get the sweet spot of caffeine's not clouding everything, and the really acute stuff like caffeine, like stimulants or cannabis. Get your timing right for that. And then you'll know what you're working with. Let's see. Sonia says, when doing neurofeedback, does one need to look at the monitor and focus all the time? Or they not need to do it and the training will be done subconsciously? It's the latter. Yeah, great question. Most neurofeedback is involuntary. This process was discovered in the mid-1960s on cats. Cats are really bad instruction followers. This is an involuntary reward process or operant conditioning process. It makes a lot of sense. You can't feel your brainwaves. They're definitely happening. You can see mine are happening right now. This is my vulnerable brain shown to you. But you can't feel them. I can't control my brain waves. I could kind of sit still and concentrate, and my theta would go down a little bit, but not that much. And I wouldn't be able to really bring the beta up all that much voluntarily. You just can't really voluntarily shape your own brain activity all that well. And so instead, the computer is moving itself next to where my brain is moment to moment, every 30 seconds the way I have it set up. When my brain happens to flex itself automatically in the right direction, then the game continues. The beeps happen and the visuals. And my brain's smart enough to notice that the beeps are happening only when it's trending brainwaves in one direction. And when those brainwaves shift, the beeps slow down or stop. So my brain is doing the training. My mind is just kind of along for the experience right now. Hey, Patricia, thanks for showing up, and good question. I've seen how allergy shots can affect neurofeedback. Yeah, anything that causes a systemic reaction can really impact neurofeedback. I would also flip it. I've seen how neurofeedback can affect allergies. I've seen people reduce and eliminate allergies using neurofeedback. I'm not exactly sure how, because histamine is a neurotransmitter, but there seems to be a certain type of nervous system for which activation goes along with both the body and the brain. And neurofeedback works on that phenomena directly, which is interesting, creates a resistance in some ways, in some people, to allergens. Allergy shots can also shut down neurofeedback a little bit. And we're getting into the other part of this, which is when doing neurofeedback, what about medication then? So for the brain maps, I mentioned you should clear out necessary meds and otherwise just get the right timing. But when you're doing brain training, what I'm doing right now, you don't need to have any modification of meds, because I'm training my brain relative to itself moment to moment. I'm not training relative to a database. And so if I had caffeine or cannabis or something in my system, my brain is still reacting with the right theta, the right beta, et cetera, moment to moment. So you can have whatever medication you need to have in your system as you go. There are some considerations though. Some medications and some recreational substances will be experienced quite a bit differently after a few weeks of neurofeedback. This is really true of psychostimulants like Ritalin, Adderall, et cetera, and it's really true of cannabis, that about 3 to 5 weeks in, usually in the 3 to 4 week range, the tolerance you have to Adderall or to cannabis goes away. And the same dosing of Adderall feels like you took twice as much as you should have. Or the same cannabis that you're used to recreationally or medically using feels like it hits you 2 or 3 times harder than you expect. And watch for that, because what that means is you've reached a place with your brain training where things are getting juicy and flexible enough, and you can actually back out and back off on the cannabis or the Adderall, whatever it is that you're noticing, and just ride that down. And so it does give you this opportunity to change your relationships with some of these fairly strong substances. In the case of like SSRIs or mood stabilizers, I would not say you notice any potentiation, but you should notice your experiences, your resources kind of coming up to meet you, the floor coming up to meet you. And then later, once your mood is more resilient, et cetera, then you can worry about withdrawing the medication, because things like SSRIs, et cetera, don't get in the way of the process of neurofeedback really at all. So you have that freedom to, keep the support of antidepressants in place and then bring things up with neurofeedback. Now, while you're doing neurofeedback, there are some medications that will get in the way. SSRIs will not, stimulants won't get in the way of the learning, but some things do impair learning. And high dose benzos and high dose opiates will both blunt neurofeedback. They won't stop it, but they can make it really hard. So if someone's abusing Xanax at high levels or Vicodin or something, you're actually going to get a blunted effect in the neurofeedback. And it ends up being a little harder to make movement, and the regularity, getting the session count in, making sure you get all the sessions in, you're getting as many sessions as possible. That becomes a little more important when someone's using those learning blunting drugs. And, often people that are overusing those drugs, their doctor would rather they use as little as they feel they need for Xanax or Vicodin. And so that should be part of the conversation, a question around the relationship with these substances, because the opportunity is going to be there to reduce if you can get some impacts on the anxiety, the pain, et cetera. And neurofeedback does work on things that opiates and benzos work on. So we end up getting some impacts on those resources. It's just not as obvious because you're getting slower movement and because the way the drugs hit you are not really changed. So you have to have this opportunity to sort of see if you can fall asleep without the trazodone, or see if you can, go to the sporting event without the Xanax, and kind of feel your brain shift over time. But generally, the drugs that get in the way of the training process itself are somewhat rare, and you have to be on kind of high doses. Even someone who's actively drinking alcohol or other recreational drugs, you can train the brain straight through it to some extent. So you have that opportunity. The non-medication nature of neurofeedback also means you can work around and through most medication as you go. Other things that might maximize neurofeedback would be sleep. Now, neurofeedback almost always improves sleep, especially in the SMR landscape, which is the classic style of neurofeedback. But if your sleep is really, really dysregulated, and you're really thrown off with narcolepsy and circadian work shift disorders, and you don't sleep properly, and you haven't for a long time, that can get in the way of not the changes occurring, because you'll still see changes building up in brain maps over a couple of months, but it can really get in the way of feeling anything happening. And that makes it harder to guide and adjust. Anyone who works at Peak Brain knows that we do a lot of changing. We put in 2 to 4 sessions, and we test them, we see how things are going, and we mix it up, mostly to avoid overtraining in one direction. But part of that is also to create some strategic change. You might train left and right side against each other and then train them together. Kind of like you might do your bicep and your tricep in the same day in the gym to get complementary effects. And as I said at the beginning of the talk tonight, I tend to add a lot of SMR. So I might do something that's not a pure SMR protocol and then end with an SMR to add a little bit of gravity, a little bit of weight to the process, which SMR can slow things down as well as create some plasticity. So it helps you with inhibitory tone. So if you train a strong beta, might be activating. And if you add some SMR afterwards, then you're giving the brain a little bit of a control over the process it just went through. And it can actually add a little bit of gravity, if you will, to the process and make the brain react, but not overreact to the training you just did. So I like to include SMR as a way to control the intensity of the non-SMR protocols we're doing. So those of you who've trained with me, I see a couple of the employees here, also some of our clients. That's what we're doing. That's one of the reasons you often see an SMR, meaning a C4 or a CZ, in the mix, because they work on lots of things themselves, including sleep, but an executive function, some anxiety stuff, some body stuff, some pain. But the SMR itself is so powerful for giving the brain control over what's happening moment to moment. SMR also helps with learning. So by continuing to layer in a lot of learning-based support, the SMR means people start getting much better sleep and consolidating, learning faster at night. And so this helps us get the progress. I was talking to one of the folks that I mentor, who's a clinician in the neurofeedback space. And this happens fairly frequently that somebody comes to me and says, hey, I've been doing neurofeedback for a while, but I don't know how to do it in a traditional way, looking at brain maps, picking protocols. I use this system that kind of gives me stuff, and I just do that. And I've been teaching some therapists more of a neuroscience-based foundation and how to develop protocols. And one of my mentees a couple days ago said to me, yeah, I don't know what it is, but the protocols I get from you, clients feel them when you do them much more than other protocols. And that is because A, we're tailoring to the QEEG in a careful way, and B, we're adding a lot of SMR. So SMR both creates a gravity, a weight to the process to avoid the brain overreacting, but it encourages plasticity and learning. So it makes sure that things keep changing as well. So that's one of my tricks. If you're watching this video, mentee, is that SMR keeps things juicy more than sometimes in other protocols. And so it's our secret weapon for blending things in. Now, in terms of regularity and amount of neurofeedback, somebody asked on Reddit recently, sorry, let me answer this question here for El Chatarino. When we get an effect, we get an experience, meaning when we train, we feel something? Yeah, generally. Yes, Sonia's asking, are the attended effects of neurofeedback permanent? If not, how often are the tune-up sessions needed to be done? Great questions. It's really feeding right into what I wanted to talk about next, was how often should you train? And what happens over time as you keep training? So again, this is not published literature, but I've seen these things shared at conferences, other colleagues looking at data, my own data, and there seems to be a sweet spot for getting the sessions to build up and become permanent, and also to create the change. This is sort of an exercise experience for the brain, but it's also a learning experience, and that takes repetition. So neurofeedback, the way that I do it, I think you should do it no more than 2 days in a row to allow the learning cycles, the sleep and the next day, to build up in a way that makes sense and supports the training and not overtrain, not exhaust a bit of tissue. But I also think that people should be training 3 times a week as the sweet spot of getting enough sessions in for enough impact. And some of the collegial shared information I've seen suggests that training 3 times a week is twice as impactful as training twice a week. And training 4 times a week is slightly more impactful than training 3 times a week. So this is why I encourage folks to train 3 times a week or every other day or 2 days on, 1 day off. It's to get into that place where you're training in that 3 times a week range, and then you're kind of keeping plasticity up. My theory about why 3 times a week is so much more powerful than twice a week is because there's actually good research showing that every session of neurofeedback, a single session, creates a burst of plasticity in the brain that lasts for a while. There's something called a motor evoked potential, which is when you zap the brain with a TMS coil over the hand area, let's say, and the amount of energy you send into the cortex will make the hand bounce, make the motor neuron fire. And after doing a session of neurofeedback, the amount of energy required to make that tissue fire, make the cells fire, is dramatically reduced. The cells are much more likely to fire. The plasticity has gone up with a single session of neurofeedback. So these are fairly powerful tools to create a plasticity boost. And I think that means if you continue to do it about every other day, you don't just keep plasticity up after each session, but you kind of keep it up high broadly. And I do find that other interventions, other techniques dovetail really well. So folks that meditate or do physical therapy or weight lift or do psychotherapy, that stuff starts to work better and create more change in them. So I get calls from like physical therapists all the time who are saying, what do you do to my client? She walked in without a cane today. That's so weird. Her balance is amazing today, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And it's a plasticity thing that we're doing. Here, let me get myself unhooked while I set up. So Sonia, as you do these protocols, effects will build up. And I do another brain map about every 25 sessions, between 20 and 30 sessions. And what I find is you can see the changes somewhere after 15 or 18 sessions. And so 20 is a good one to go after. And you typically can see up to a full standard deviation of change, a z-score of change on the bell curve, which is actually kind of a lot subjectively. It's enough that, when that kid's getting a full standard deviation, school's calling home and saying, oh, we noticed Jimmy's behavior's better, or whatever. It's enough to notice and have people around you notice generally. And my take on when it becomes permanent, for these things that are regulatory resources, for sleep, for attention, for anxiety, for sensory, for social, for speed of processing, my take is that somewhere around 40 sessions, you've reached a permanent range, especially if you're doing 3 times a week. So about 3 months at about 3 times a week should produce a permanent change in things like ADHD and anxiety and sleep. And we tend to see about 2 standard deviations of change in the data when looking at both executive function testing and in resting QEEG. And for those sorts of goals, attention, stress, and sleep especially, it's a fairly stable process, I think, because you're using those resources every day. So once the brain learns enough, once it moves into that mode enough, then it's practicing those things all the time. Now, the permanence isn't exactly the same for things like seizure disorders or large developmental issues. We often have to go back and do another round, or sometimes do ongoing training when there's more severe things. But for regulatory features, for common goals that many people have, I would say that you can think about doing neurofeedback for between 30 and 60 sessions, and somewhere in there, the permanence will have kicked in, as long as you aren't trying too many different protocols, as long as you're structuring your protocols towards your goals and building up enough of the same exercises. And when I say of the same ones, I would never do the same thing for like 10 sessions in a row. I do between about 2 and up to 8 repeats of the same sequence of protocols in a little set. I might do 2 or 3 things in a set for somebody and have them repeat that a few times, change it up, repeat a few times, change it up. And I have people go up to 8 sessions in a row, up to about 2 weeks straight of one particular protocol if it's working well. But I find that tends to really be best when it's a very, very young person or someone with a lot of acute need, and we found something that works and we kind of stick with it for a while. Most people do better shifting every 4 protocols, or even every 2 or 3, depending. And so this is part of why we ask you for your sleep, your stress, your mood, what you're noticing. Because if you say something, we're like, oh, that protocol has been working fine, but session 4, it's a little different. Their sleep isn't quite as good. They didn't notice the impacts of it. You're probably starting to overtrain a little bit and getting reduced impact. And so this is one of the reasons we'll shift it up for you. So getting guidance and sequencing your protocols is actually a huge piece about getting the right neurofeedback. I work with folks all the time who come to me who say, I didn't get what I wanted from somebody else, some side effects, some suboptimal effects. And it's almost always because the person didn't have their protocols adjusted very much. They did one thing 20 times, or one magic box system where the provider had no ability to adjust it, and they got pushed further and further and further in the wrong direction. That shouldn't happen in the neurofeedback. We should be very iterative and listen carefully what people are experiencing and then adjust as we go. That's how you actually create movement in someone's experience, and then you capture it in data to prove it. So these are not that hard to see, but you have to have that perspective of validating from the person's experience, watching the physiology, planning from the physiology, watching the experience, and then going back to the physiology again. Really, really important to integrate all of those aspects. So, but no, Sonia, somewhere around 40 sessions, maybe, permanent should kick in. Now, not everyone's goals are met at that level. If you had nonverbal autism and a seizure disorder and you were bedwetting and you had crazy ADHD and a lot of sensory issues, about 40 sessions in, your sensory issues, your executive function, your bedwetting might be significantly different and fairly stable. But your seizure disorder, not there yet. And if you had language difficulties, nowhere near that. It's a very slow-moving resource. So it's a little bit different when it's more severe stuff. Or if you had like a significant TBI, you know, traumatic brain injury, and you're having trouble with your coordination, you had a spastic arm or something because you had a damage in the hand area, that can change. I've seen things like that change a lot in neurofeedback, but it's not nearly as reliable to know how it's going to stick. So the more unique and the more damaged things are, the less we necessarily know how quickly we get to change. But if it's classic stuff like PTSD, OCD, ADHD, sleep maintenance issues, sleep onset, drinking too much, craving for alcohol, no access to your emotions, no access to creativity, those are all low-hanging fruit goals in the neurofeedback landscape where we make a linear change and kind of lock down the change in a few months for most people, like almost everyone. So you can count on that if you get that progress and you've done 30, 40, 50 sessions. Whatever you've gotten done, you should kind of trust as a new floor. And then you can do other things to make sure it stays stable, like meditating in the mornings, like hacking your sleep. My big sleep hacks are don't eat before bed. You know, fasting before bed allows more growth hormone and deeper sleep. So fast before bed, get up early in the morning, 7 days a week, and go for a walk or do some low-key yoga or exercise for 10 minutes when you first get up. Before you eat and before you become sedentary, spend that little time in the morning in a minimal viable practice for circadian cueing. That morning time will let you anchor everything else around it and not eat too late, not rush out the door, you know, get up early enough to have your morning routine be your minimal viable practice of self-care. And that will also help your neurofeedback. Now, you don't really need to modify medications or drugs to get more out of neurofeedback. You know, so that's not really a stacking thing, but you can add very significant meditation experiences beyond just a little bit in the morning, and that will accelerate the change you get. You can add other interventions, but sometimes other interventions can really backfire. TMS, for instance, works really well sometimes, but you shouldn't combine it with neurofeedback because they can work at cross purposes. Somebody asked on Reddit if I would talk about ketamine. And I've seen ketamine cause rapid lifting and depression on many people when they go to a ketamine specialist and get some support. And I've been fairly impressed by it. But you can kind of see in the brain maps that strong anxiety and strong depression as this, you know, really activated phenomena, often in beta waves. And I've had other people, more than one, who goes to a ketamine clinic and gets some infusions, and it unlocks really, really dramatic dysregulated anxiety. And those people have some impulsivity, and their anxiety is often driven by large amounts of theta. So the brain's disinhibited. Often anxiety is a beta phenomenon. The gas pedal's kind of cramped up and the resources are all spasming. Usually anxiety is a beta phenomenon, or low alpha, you know, low neutral, or large beta, large amounts of activation. But for some people, the theta is excessive and individual tissues will be disinhibited, allowing a lot of anxiety to come up. And those people, ketamine will actually work really counter to your goals and may erode some of the impacts of neurofeedback that have built up. I've seen it happen twice at this point in people who I have a very long experience with it helping a lot with their anxiety, and saw ketamine as a, you know, dynamite in the kiddie pool, really blowing up some progress. Now we're getting more progress again. One person, we got great progress. It was very short-lived. Somebody else, we're chipping away at her progress. And I think we're getting somewhere. So you can always repair your brain. But I think that you should be cautious adding too much. You know, I get crypto bros and tech geeks all the time who are like, dude, I'm microdosing X, Y, and Z. And I'm like, well, okay. But two things. One is as you do neurofeedback, your microdosing will cease to be microdosing. You'll get macrodosing effects from it. So watch that and or consider, you know, choosing not to. But also, you don't, you know, why are you microdosing? Usually to bring up plasticity. And if you're doing neurofeedback a few times a week, your plasticity is really high. If you want it to be higher, I don't encourage you to have random mushrooms or other things that are more illicit. Meditate, do yoga, 10, 20 minutes. You do not need to do much more than that to get the maximum juiciness your brain could ever possibly handle. So, you know, be careful with lots of random interventions, but also think about why you're building different interventions strategically. All right, let me answer some more questions here. Hey, Fred, did a short run before alpha theta. Okay. During the training. Sorry. Run before alpha theta. I misunderstood. During the neurofeedback, you found it hard to get into the almost sleep mode. Not much ocean sound. Yes. Yep, totally. What you did was you raised your vagal tone, probably. You may have bumped your cortisol a little bit, and that can make it really hard to get into the alpha theta crossover state. I've seen people in our offices come in, you know, our Culver City office and some other offices are known for having really good coffee. And I've had a couple clients when we were really busy years ago in Culver City come in and always want coffee, which is great. But I've noticed a couple people, and they change their behavior around this. They can't drink coffee and then go do an alpha theta session. The brain won't go into crossover very well. It makes some sense. But, you know, the run probably did something like that, some activation. And so it was a little hard for that theta to come up. You basically got too focused during the run is my guess, Fred. That's interesting. Thanks for sharing that. Radar Ashwood is asking, how many protocols do I typically do in a neurofeedback session? Between 1 and 3 is typical. There are other, that's not every case I use, but I would say the vast majority, 95% of protocols are 2 or 3 segments. You know, 2 50-minute segments, 3 12-minute segments. I also do sometimes combination protocols, so build up individual 1, 2, and 3 segments, dial in frequencies, see what works, and then combine them into 2-channel contingent duals or sequence a set of 3. So there's different ways I combine the individual sets differently. And I will often have somebody like drop out one segment within a day and rotate something else in. And so I'll have one segment used across many days, and then it's overlapping a different protocol and, you know, doing other combination, strategic training, different resources by, you know, progressively activating different things. You can get very different effects in neurofeedback if you sequence protocols differently. And some protocols, I developed a class of protocol I've been calling the sweep, which you do a series of bilateral hemisphere protocols, and you physically move the wires to a couple different adjacent locations, and you train adjacent locations with their respective frequencies. And you get a lot of co-activation of tissue that way. It's very, very, very powerful. So doing like a sequenced, you know, F3, F4 dual to a C3, C4 dual is a very different experience than doing those 4 segments individually, or even doing one of those duals by itself. So if you have protocols you like, you may want to experiment with changing the order and or combining them, because they will create different effects. Let's see. Erin has a question, a wild question that she has not been able to find information on. What about psychedelics? Should doing that on an off neurofeedback day help increase the neuroplasticity, or unnecessary? Yeah, it's unnecessary is a short answer, because the neurofeedback is making your brain sizzle with tons of BDNF. And if you're doing anything else in self-care, meditation, exercise, you're taking classes, anything else, then you're really at maximum. And the neurofeedback is going to make the psychedelics too powerful over a few weeks. So it's going to be a moving target in terms of what your dosing is for the psychedelics. So I think that unless there's some really, really important reason to keep doing them, change your brain and then maybe go back into psychedelics with a different expectation. But you don't need to do it while doing neurofeedback. You know, go for exercise, meditate, or do something else like that several days of the week. That plus neurofeedback, and you're going to be at max plasticity pretty much, Aaron, I think. Madeline's asking, what about delaying caffeine intake for 90 minutes from waking? Yes. One of the Huberman protocols. I would say that an hour is sufficient, maybe less. And there's a couple caveats. So I recommend people do their morning routine, which involves some low-key activity before eating, before caffeine, before becoming sedentary. You know, hit the restroom, and then do your 5 sun salutations, or go for a walk with a dog, or bring your spouse coffee from that place that's 2 blocks away, something. Find that morning routine that's gently, you know, moving your body. And the reason I say gently is because I want you to burn off the cortisol and the blood sugar that woke you up without calling for a lot more. Don't reoccupy those receptors after you've just had them occupied. It will be a weak signal. And that's also why one would want to delay caffeine for an hour or so, is to let the cortisol burn off. Now, the caveat is if the only time you have to work out hard is first thing in the morning, and weight loss, fat loss is a big piece of why you're working out, then you should slam coffee as you walk into the resistance training room or the gym, because that will actually increase the fat burning potential early in the morning. It's counterintuitive, but caffeine does have that lipolytic, I'm not sure what the word is, process. And if cortisol is high and you're working out gently, it doesn't help. But if you're working out intensely, it seems to help. So yes, caffeine is fine in the morning, but I would wait until after your body's woken up to have that stimulant boost, so to speak. El Chatarino, is theta making regulation of beta the issue more with those types of anxiety due to the signal weakening? Yeah, it can be either. Great question. The theta excess can be a function of theta itself. So your brain is disinhibited in a circuit, or the theta excess can be a function of the beta being a little bit weak. So the power of the circuit's kind of hard to voluntarily activate. Or you could have the alpha weak. You can't put it in neutral and the theta takes over. You can kind of see other brainwaves typically. It's not just the theta. You'll either have also some delta, which you can think about metabolic things, neurovascular couplings, sleep, etc. Or you can see issues in the theta with beta itself. Then it's a failure mode in theta and beta with low power alpha. And that's a more classic anxiety like OCD with tic features. But these will all have, think about which tissue it is and where it is, and then what its failure modes are. Not every tissue tends to fail, tends to get stuck in the same mode. Many tissues have excess theta modes. Some tissues have low power alpha modes, but individual tissues tend to have a mode they fall over into. And getting good at spotting that mode will help you, spot the OCD, whether or not it's beta front midline or theta front midline. And if you know that it's OCD type features, but it might operate differently given the failure modes, you can then ask sophisticated questions like, with beta, you ask questions about ritual thought, intrusive ideas, perseveration. But if someone has front midline theta, they might have songs in their head or bite their nails or have a tic. So you can kind of start getting a sense of how the different failure modes also work. And look at the QEEG, but it should start to make sense if you think about the ways in which individual tissues tend to dysregulate, not just about the brain waves as the signature of dysregulation. Hope that made some sense. Give you something to dig into anyways. Sonia is saying she came across an article on the internet noting that NFB intended effects are maximized when they are along with medication, meaning that NFB per se cannot be as much effective, correct? No, actually not correct. There's one paper on, or two maybe papers that include neurofeedback and Adderall or Ritalin, and then neither. And in those papers, both of them, they showed more behavior control with both neurofeedback and medication than either alone. So the neurofeedback alone was weaker than the combination, and medication alone was weaker than the combination. And the effect on attention was stronger in those tests on the medication group versus the neurofeedback only group. However, one of those studies is a longitudinal study looking at these adolescents and then again in college. And what they found is the kids that received either neurofeedback and meds or just neurofeedback, but not the medication only group, succeeded in college. The kids that had received medications were able to control symptoms better, but there wasn't a change, and they were less academically successful later in life than those that had received some neurofeedback. So you also can find papers that don't look at medication, that just look at neurofeedback with executive function. And there are plenty of papers that are impactful and show change. There are some papers that show very weak effects. Sometimes people will cherry pick papers and do review articles and get kind of weak review articles. But the really, really important thing to know about the research is that the literature does not do neurofeedback the way it's done in the clinics. All of those studies picked one protocol and basically did it for a group of people. That's not how neurofeedback is done. It's iterative, it changes. And so a great way to make it not work well is not to change it. And even those papers that picked one protocol and stuck with it for one group, even those papers show some impact on reaction times and speed of processing and executive function. So I'm working on a more complete article review of these different topics. But no, there's plenty of ADHD and executive function type medication plus neurofeedback or neurofeedback alone comparisons. And also not just ADHD, but Dr. Gary Schumer did one on T-cell response, on immune system response. In the mid-'80s, he did research that was published in 2006, I believe. Dr. Gary Schumer. There was 3 groups. One was cranial electrostim, which is like a mild zapping technique for relaxation. One had neurofeedback, and one had both. And these were groups of HIV positive people in the mid-'80s before any treatments were available. And they found the group that received neurofeedback or neurofeedback and STIM, but not the group that received STIM only, had a very significant change in their T cells, their CD4 plus cells, over the length of the study. So neurofeedback makes everything work better. Medications work more strongly, weightlifting works better, physical therapy works better, language learning, therapy, EMDR therapists, brain spotting therapists send clients to me because the clients are stuck. You do training on their brain and the therapy starts working better, the therapist is engaging in. So it's all interacting. The brain's not a parcellated system. So you are getting effects of both things in these studies when you see better effects on behavior, but that's the behavior, not things like academic success. So it's very important. Radar is saying psychedelics won't help NFB. Yeah, psychedelics won't help NFB. The NFB will help psychedelics though. If you're not getting good effect from your psychedelics, do some neurofeedback and you'll get a lot of effect from your psychedelics again. Ilya, hey Ilya, nice to see you. Not to mention that the ab reaction profile is a lot worse with psychedelics than NFB. Yeah, that is a bit of a concern. If you're continuing to microdose and you do neurofeedback, you're risking showing up somewhere and tripping and not wanting to trip. Like I have people that are college type professors and programmers who microdose, and they've mentioned things like ignoring me when I tell them that they should be careful with their psychedelics. Oh yeah, I'm an old hippie. I've been dropping LSD since before you're born. I'm like, oh, more sensitive. Shut up. Okay, and they come back later like, okay, I was in the middle of a lecture and I was hallucinating because my microdose was hitting me way too hard. Yeah, sorry. I tried to tell you. But it's a really interesting experience, and it really tells people that they're changing their brain. And these types of people who use these substances are fairly experienced with being altered anyway. So it wasn't tragic or problematic, but it does make your brain, neurofeedback makes your brain more plastic. So you got to take that into account with all the things you're using as interventions. Fred says, I have a lead water line. A lead, really? Lead? Oof. Can that affect your neurofeedback? Your water test last tested at 6 parts per million with a filter. I don't know if 6 parts per million, I think it's kind of low, right? That's a safe level. Yeah, lead will really impact your brain if you're being exposed to lead. Lead is really similar chemically to calcium. And lead gets into the calcium receptors in neurons, and it binds irreversibly. So a molecule of lead will occupy the calcium receptor and then never leave, preventing calcium signaling at that receptor. And we can work around that a little bit, but not a lot. And so lead is really, really dangerous. I think 6 parts per million is low, like safe, but I don't know what those numbers are off the top of my head, Fred. So you may want to think about evaluating that if it's in the way. Sonia's thanking us. Of course, Sonia, my pleasure. Thanks so much for participating tonight. We really had some great questions. And thanks to everyone for participating. So if you guys could do me a favor and give the video a like, give the channel a subscribe, and go and find another video and leave a comment or boost it or share it on Facebook or something, that really does help the channel quite a bit. Trying to get the word out and get more of these live streams going. So if there's other topics you want me to talk about, I've been doing this now for like 7 or 8 months, and I've written like 25 or more articles on different topics, and I don't want to just start rehashing the same topics. So I've been kind of getting deeper and taking different, approaches to some of the same ideas, but I'm happy to get a little more far afield in this biohacking landscape. If you guys want me to talk about other things, please just leave a comment or go to the community page and leave some comments on one of those polls and see if you can't maybe help me break out of the idea jail I'm in a little bit right now, thinking about what to do. So anyways, folks, we really appreciate everyone's attention and time tonight. I will see you all hopefully soon. If you need a brain map, come get one at Peak Brain. They're a discount if you've watched the podcast or the live stream. Brain maps are $250 in the offices, unlimited for a year. So, hey, Rain Storm 2008, first time here, and all this information was golden. Love it. We love that you participated. Thanks for showing up. There's 6 months of these old ones to watch. If you're bored, go for it. And folks, have a lovely evening if it's evening for you. I got to find the button on my OBS and stop it from streaming. There we go. All right, guys, you have a good evening. Take care of those brains.